had a look at rhythmical textures, let's now talk about chordal textures that imply the use of some form of arpeggiation to create motion. These are obviously going to be much less rhythmical in nature if compared to the previous ones, with the main difference being that they're great at providing some kind of underlying blur that creates a vibe, oftentimes brought by strings and woodwinds. Oftentimes, if not always, because, that's what these instruments do the best, agility is their strong suit. As you can imagine, there is a lot more that you can do and explore with these types of textures. You can be very creative if compared to the previous ones, which are great. You can obviously combine different instruments together, but you will mostly be playing with different types of rhythms, right? While with these types of textures, you can experiment with drastically, different vibes. And the first example we're going to look at today is going to be a very useful one for providing a subtle sense of motion. Let's have a listen. So this is yet again some kind of variation of the very first example that we looked at, in the previous class with the rhythmical textures. The foundational elements are the same, melody and the chords in the same register, same voicings. So the main difference is really the underlying motion now provided by violas and cellos playing an arpeggio in contrary motion. Let's have a listen to those two. And for this particular example, low brass and harp gel the two parts together. So nice and warm, very low dynamics on brass. On top of all this, we have the melody on violin 1 and violin 2 in octaves, plus flutes and oboes. Now let's combine everything together one more time. So you might want to use this particular type of texture when you have, some kind of light arpeggiation in the left hand in your sketch, or maybe you want to have some pads, some sustain, but still provide some subtle sense of motion. So let's have a listen to the second one. So I would consider this second example some kind of variation of the first one, but as you just heard, it's much less subtle. It's still quite similar in the sense that it shares a lot of, the most important elements, with the melody and chords in the same register, same voicings, but it's almost like it's on the second level of intensity. And now the background texture, that blur is provided by the woodwinds. So what we have here really is a flute and a clarinet moving in contrary motion, and similarly to before, we have percussion providing some form of glue. So the piano is doubling the woodwind part exactly while the harp is just moving up and down. And that's simply because it would not be idiomatic for the harp to play a part like what the piano is doing right now. We have again some nice open chords on brass, double basses and low woodwinds. Exactly the same voicings as the previous one. And soaring on top, we have a big melody on violins, violas, cellos and French horns. And the reason why I decided to put all these players on the melody is simply because we have an overlap between the texture and the melody itself. So in order for the melody to cut through, it needs a lot more support, right? So what I decided to do here is just, to double violin 1 with violin 2, and then put a viola an octave lower, and then cellos doubled by a French horn as well. It's something we talked about, in the class on octave doublings and unison doublings. Now let's try something different for the following example. Let's try a different kind of melody and different kinds of textures. So what we're doing right now is combining a pulse with some arpeggios to create a much more complex sound. We have the arpeggio taken by flutes and clarinets, just like before, but just to make the part a little bit clearer, they're not moving in contrary motion now like they did before, but rather they're playing in octaves. So it creates less of a blur. By doubling the part in octaves, we have a much higher level of detail. And below them, we have French horns playing this kind of pulse, together with bassoons and double basses. And as usual, percussion gels all these parts together, with piano essentially both playing the pulse and the arpeggio, harp just doing some kind of arpeggiation, and vibraphone just playing the pulse. Now let me just play all these different parts together, because I think they make a cool sound even without the melody on top. Similar to before, we have a complex texture that overlaps with the melody in the same register. So for that to really be able to sing, we need to put, more players on it. And what I'm doing right now is similar again to what I did before, with strings playing in 3 octaves, violin 1 and violin 2 in unison, violas in the middle and cellos on the bottom. Now let's play everything together one more time. So it's a very complex sound, but as you can see, there isn't really that much stuff going on. We only really have 3 different parts. We have the melody, we have the chords, which is the pulse really on the French horns and the double basses and bassoons, and we have some form of arpeggiation on top. So let's move on to the following example, much simpler than what we just looked at. So this is super common and effective, and it shows that you don't need, you know, many parts to build a big sound and you know, a nice vibe. And what we have over here is really just some measured trios on woodwinds and strings plus celeste. This part, together with the harmony, you know, with these major 7 chords, gives the little piece straight away a very kind of fairy tale sort of vibe. And in the bottom, we have the melody on cellos and French horns for added warmth. So very beautiful, very simple, super effective. So that's it. Let's see a different version of this in another context. Now, the previous example we said had a fairy tale kind of quality, while this sounds more romantic, maybe. We have pretty much the same kind of devices, you know, with that arpeggiation, the measured trios on the woodwinds, but by now moving them, you know, to clarinets and bassoons, the part acquires a much more, you know, sophisticated, elegant kind of quality. And that went together with the celeste, of course. And right below them, we have some chords, some held chords, you know, sustains on strings. So violin 1, violin 2, and violas. This is something you see oftentimes, and that we had in a few of the examples already, you know, to have this kind of, you know, chordal texture on top of pads or sustains. And for the melody, we have cellos and flutes 2 octaves apart. It's a really beautiful combination, slightly unusual. Now let's listen to everything together one more time. So you can see how, if we compare this example to the previous one, how orchestration really does give the piece a very different kind of vibe, even if we are pretty much using the same kinds of elements that we had before. You know, just by moving the you know, the chordal texture down a couple of octaves in the middle of the piano, you know, and just giving it to instruments that tend to have a rounder kind of tone, like clarinets and bassoons, you know, we can use orchestration to build a very different kind of vibe. The following example is going to be super simple and very different from this one. So this is to show how unmeasured techniques such as, you know, tremolos or trills can give the piece, the orchestration, a slightly more unsettled, unbalanced kind of vibe. So let me break it down for you. What we have over here in the woodwinds, flutes and clarinets is some trills. While in the strings, we have some tremolos. So that's pretty much it. We don't really have anything else. We only really have the melody on French horn and cellos. Let's compare it to the previous example with the measured trios, because it's a similar kind of orchestration, but it has a different vibe. So this was the previous example. And here's the new one. Perhaps you might want to use an orchestration like this if you want to create tension within the arrangement, or even slightly hide the harmony. Let's now listen to the last example. It's going to be an interesting one, because for this one, we're going to combine pretty much everything we have been talking about so far. It's a very different sound. It's a much more complex sound that combines a lot of mixed techniques, such as pulse, arpeggiation, unmeasured techniques, and rhythm as well. And we can see this precisely in the woodwind part on flutes and clarinets. So in this part, we had a little bit of everything, right? We had a rhythm, we had some unmeasured techniques such as, trios, and we had an arpeggio, which is the part itself. Right below them, we have a pulse on French horns that is similar to the second example we looked at today. Which is on French horns and tubular bells, of course. Violas add a very subtle sense of excitement with an arpeggio, but played tremolando. And of course, we had the harp doing an arpeggio as well. Which is a mixture of the viola part and the woodwind part. In the bottom end, we have basses and cellos playing pits. And that's just to give a stronger sense of harmony, because obviously with all these different parts combined, we can run into the risk of hiding the harmony a little bit. So let me play the texture without the melody. And just like before, when we have a complex texture like this, the melody needs extra support, right? So for that, we're using an oboe together with a piccolo and glockenspiel as well. So what really helps the melody cut through here is the piccolo, which is, the instrument in the orchestra that has, the highest kind of pitch. Let's have a listen to everything together. Right, so I wanted to put together this example for you because I wanted to show you how it doesn't have to be either one technique or the other. You can be very creative and combine them together to achieve, very, very, interesting kind of sounds. This particular one, was meant to sound very bright, very positive, and we combined all these parts together to that effect. So to recap a couple of points here, just, some of these techniques will not necessarily be parts that you're going to be able to physically play on the piano as you're sketching the piece, but that doesn't matter. These orchestration techniques are meant to expand on, your piano sketch to basically achieve a very specific kind of mood. Like in the case for the second example. You can use an orchestration like this and adapt it to your sketch anytime you want to suggest, I don't know, a sense of, soaring adventure, right? Disney soaring adventure, as opposed to, the following one, to suggest something a little bit more magical, maybe. Everything can still be broken down, to foundation, melody and chords, right? And anything else that you put on top of it will be essentially to serve the mood that you're trying to communicate with the music and the story you are trying to tell with the piece.